Sit down then, boys and girls. Don't follow the dreadful examples of our politicians in Parliament. Try to act like civilised human beings. Now, back to the European elections. Altogether, in this week's election, there will be 39 parties putting forward 747 candidates. I will most certainly not in this series make any mention of the majority, as they are very small and in the main merely interested in making some obscure point with no expectation of winning a seat. I will mention first those parties which will end up with few seats but are nevertheless significant. The Green Party, first, have candidates in all 12 constituencies. Traditionally, they do better in EU elections than in home elections, and votes were boosted in the early days of the great global warming scare. But now that the predictions have failed to materialise and are seen to be based on false premises, that is, inaccurate understanding, Millie Brain, not a building with subsidence, and governments have used green arguments as an excuse to raise extra taxes, the attraction of the Green Party has waned. The leader, Natalie Bennett, doesn't seem to think so though, but then she says other odd things too. On oil fracking, she said it was a very uncertain industry that may very well not get off the ground. I always thought that oil was under the ground. Who wants oil off the ground? Fracking has suddenly made the USA self-sufficient in oil, but of course the stuff is the wrong colour for Barmy Bennett. The Scottish Nationalists are of course standing only for the 6 Scottish seats, but with the eternal optimist Alex Salmond at the helm, they believe they will take over all Europe. You think I'm exaggerating? No fear of that with this fellow. He recently claimed that Scotland will be the pivot of Europe. As if 80 million Germans with 99 seats in the Parliament would allow that. This party is in a very odd position at this election. It wants to win seats that it can hold for 5 years, and it wants to stay in the European Union, and it wants Scotland to leave the United Kingdom. But in the latter case, it would automatically leave the EU with no assurance that it could get back in. Before the 5 years runs out, the UK may well have a referendum and then leave the European Union, with Scotland in neither the European Union nor the UK, and the Scotch MPs thrown out of their seats. Salmond is a charming wee laddie with an impish smile, but the gamble he is intent on making with Scotland's future is frightening in the extreme. A few years ago, the same chappie was holding up Ireland and Iceland as examples to Scotland as to how prosperous it could be on its own. Of course, they both suffered terrible financial crashes. That tells us a lot about wee Alex's judgment and financial understanding. Salmond's optimism has only ever been matched by Noah's, and the latter had God on his side. The only time Salmond talks to God is when he's looking in the mirror. Then there's Plaid Cymru, the party of Wales, who almost match Salmond in wild optimism, but are nowhere near a match in ability or charm. These people will make a virtue of being beggars or conmen. They claim that the UK must remain in the EU because each person in Wales gets £40 more from the EU than they put in, but then admit that most of this money goes not to each person, but to farmers. They seem totally oblivious of the fact that the money that comes from the EU is but a small fraction of what the UK as a whole pays in, and that, relieved of that burden, the rest of the UK could easily more than compensate for the Welsh loss. Incidentally, if Plaid's Jill Evans does get that 1 seat, She promises that she will reform the EU and ensure Welsh has the same status as other EU languages. All on her own, busy lady. One wonders why she has not already achieved all this. Strangely, there's no mention in their campaign of the catastrophic decline in the Welsh National Health Service. Honestly, with friends like this, poor Wales doesn't need enemies. And now we come to the Liberal Democrat Party of Cleverclogs Clegg. As it is the junior member in the coalition government, led by the Deputy Prime Minister no less, one might not expect this bunch to be included among the smaller parties. But we have to realise, Cleverclogs does not, but we must, that the coalition with the Conservatives has kept David Cameron in power, but done precious little to advance the policies dear to Lib Dems prior to the 2010 election, and nothing much to give voters a reason to choose them rather than the Tories they sleep with. Indeed, it may be that if the Conservatives retain their top position next Thursday, it will in part be thanks to ex-Lib Dem voters deciding to support the man rather than his poodle. Is this symbol of a phoenix or a pigeon, overfed and can't fly fast and so easily shot down? The Lib Dems have of course been totally sold out to the European Union since their formation. They even wanted Britain to join the Euro. So much for their understanding of the real world. That, boys and girls, concludes our summary of the smaller players. Tomorrow we will conclude the course by having a look at what is on offer from Labour's Millie Brain, Tory leader Cameraman, and UKIP's fan page. Before then, do ensure that all your infant relatives have a copy of the animated alphabet.